Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 188 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined in person by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans, those that are left, and college football fans.
Hey, we're going bowling, man. It's an improvement.
It is.
Woo! Aren't you excited?
I am.
He is deep
but
down,
I'm still dealing with the crisis of yesterday.
Yes. So you may be able to hear that we're in person for this particular episode. We're together in California, recording on Saturday, November 30th. Thankfully, most of the games have ended now, so we'll be able to talk about the implication for the conference championship games, as well as Nebraska's whole situation, our unfortunate loss to Iowa, and what it means for our potential bowl game coming up.
Right.
But before we dive into all that, we're going to go ahead and open up a cold beverage here at 9 o'clock on a Saturday.
There you go.
I've got myself my Japanese Sapporo beer.
Okay, and I have a special Four Peaks Brewing Company Kilt Lifter beer, but it's a special version of it. It's a barrel-aged, so it's a Scottish ale in a bourbon barrel aging process, and it is a wonderful, wonderful beer. The thing is, it's a meal, and it has like 11.3% alcohol. So it's something you have to be careful with.
He's so excited for it, he already opened it.
Yeah, mine is already opened, yes. It's a bottle, so it wouldn't have sounded good anyway. Cheers.
All right, cheers.
There we go. Clink, clink.
Yes. Yeah, well, you were wanting to drown away your sorrows with that yesterday because we lost not only in football but also in volleyball, which we'll talk about later. We were able to be together in person, though, to watch the game. We went to a Husker bar here in San Diego, which was quite a bit of fun.
Yes, and let's give that a plug. That was the Duck Dive bar in San Diego.
Yes, the college football throwdown audience is powerful, as we know, and we'll no doubt give them great business.
Yeah, right.
But yes, on the previous podcast, we gave our predictions for the game. I was more optimistic. I thought we could win pretty solidly, 31-17, while you predicted we would win more narrowly, 20-17, 3-point game. And it was a 3-point game, but unfortunately it went the opposite way. It was 13-10, the exact same score as last year, even though defensively we were way more dominant. On both sides of the ball, we were way more dominant. If you look at the stat sheet, it's like Nebraska should have won this game by 17 points.
Absolutely correct. That's the part that's most frustrating is anybody who looks at the stat sheet or watched that game physically knows that we were the dominant offense, both on offense and defense, but we made some key mistakes on special teams, and we had one play on defense of what would otherwise be described as a great defensive performance where we just forgot how to tackle for one play. And you have to credit, Johnson, their running back, who's one of the best in the country, but it's disgusting what you witness when you rewatch that particular play on film.
Yep. Well, and fans will remember that on the previous podcast, I kind of issued the challenge to Tony White, after he kind of had a bit of a mixed performance, against USC and against Wisconsin. I wanted to see him exploit Iowa's obvious weakness of having this backup quarterback who's not very good at throwing the football and just load the box and stuff the run and dare them to throw it. And sure enough, that's what he did. We were run blitzing a lot and being able to stop their rushing game. In total, they had 115. That's 115 passing yards, and then they only had 49 rushing yards.
And that one running play was, I think, more than 49 yards.
Was it a pass play or was it a run?
No, it was a running play.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Right. Well, because we stopped them for a loss quite a bit.
Right. Exactly. So I think they may have ended with negative yards rushing if not for that one play.
Yeah.
But you may be right. Maybe it was a pass play.
Yeah. Regardless, Tony White stepped up to the challenge and came up with a great game plan. And even when our offense faltered at other points of the game or we gave them the ball right by our own goal line, we were able to stop them and force them to kick a field goal. So the defense came to play today, had some great tackles. You got to give them credit for that. And that was more on the offensive side of the ball, where Dana Holgerson, once again, like the previous Wisconsin game, called a good game plan, had a good balance of passing it and rushing it. But there was just some key plays where we failed on the execution, where our players failed, either because Dylan, missed the guy or overthrew him, or because a receiver, dropped a wide open pass, things like that. Yes. And against Iowa, who loves to exploit those little mistakes, those are the kinds of things you can't do.
Correct. They simply don't make those mistakes, and they wait for you to make them. And so a couple of the key statistics, we basically doubled them in time of possession, and we had 20 first downs and they had 5. Mm-hmm. We doubled them in yardage. I mean, when you look at the stats, it's just unfathomable that we could lose this football game. But then there's the stat, turnovers.
Yep.
2
to 0.
And them 0. So they simply, they could have just snapped the ball 3 times, taken a knee each time, and just waited for us to make mistakes and then played. And that's basically what they did.
Right. Well, and a couple other stats to highlight. Total yardage 334 to 164. Third down efficiency, we were 8 of 17. They were 0 of 10. How many games do you win when you don't convert a third down?
Well, that's the thing. When you're that dominant, we shouldn't be talking about a loss here.
Right.
And
penalties, we were 4 for 20. They were 1 of 15. So although we had more, there were small penalties.
Right.
So that wasn't the reason we lost.
No.
It was those crucial turnovers, and then we had a missed field goal that was because of a bad snap that would have at least potentially put us in a tie scenario. And you and I were both pessimistic about our chances of winning in overtime away at the Hawkeye Stadium. But still, that would have been better than losing in the manner we did.
Right. But the other key thing that we haven't even talked about is the third leg of football, the kicking game, as Tom Osborne would call it, and otherwise known as special teams, which I really hope we make some changes in, because that was disgusting. We had some poor punts. We had a botched punt reception, which led to a fumble, which led to points for these guys. 3, I think it was 3 points. Our defense did a phenomenal job in that scenario of holding them to just 3. After basically giving them the ball inside the 10-yard line or so. And so it was just a game where we made, again, just enough mistakes to allow an inferior and really quite inept Iowa football team beat us. And that has become our standard operating procedure against Iowa for about the better part of a decade.
Yep. Unfortunately, you could tell that the Nebraska fans who were at that bar we were watching at had seen this song and dance before. You and I were actually at that exact bar watching an Iowa game a few years ago.
Yeah, 3 years, yeah.
And I think we probably lost that one by a similarly low score. If you look back, they've all been by 7 points or 3 points.
Yeah, so many.
One way or the other.
Yep.
And usually going against us. So, yes, it was an unfortunate game, especially after we played generally well. We do have to be critical of Matt Rule with certain decisions that he made during the game. For example, there was a point where we had a 4th and 2 at about the 50-yard line later in the game, I think when it was tied up 10-10. So we really needed some points to be able to go up ahead of them. And Matt chose there to punt it and trust his defense rather than be a little more aggressive. Even though there was a time earlier in the game where he tried to go for it on a 4th and 1 further back on the field, like on our own 30, and we were going to go for it, and then we had a badly timed false start that set us back and forced us to punt. So it was a little strange to me where he chose to be aggressive, and then when he chose not to, where I would have gone for it.
Correct, because had we been able to convert, and it was like maybe 4th and 2 or something when we were at that 50 later in the game, and if we don't give the ball up at that point, then they maybe don't have time to then get that ball and drive down and score, right? So it the timing of his timeouts continues to be a struggle, and I don't know. It's just his in-game management just does not seem to lead to positive confidence for his team.
Right. Though we do want to highlight that, at the end of the game, right, our offensive line, which overall performed quite well, we were able to get some push on their defensive line, get some good rushing going. We had 190 yards passing it and 144 rushing it, so a good balance there.
Yeah.
But we were getting beat on the edges at times, and Dylan was getting pressured. And on this particular play, a guy came free as we were trying to go quick because we were low on time. And he gets sacked. He fumbles the ball. He gives them field possession. And then their great field goal kicker comes out, goes to kick the field goal. We call the timeout well ahead of that. But he goes ahead and kicks it anyway and makes it, in a practice run. Right. And Matt Rule is arguing with the umpire, not only that he shouldn't have been allowed to get that free kick because he called the timeout quite a bit early.
Yeah, he called it early on purpose, specifically so that the guy would not be able to go through his leg stroke for the field goal.
But what I didn't know is that it's an official rule that if a kicker kicks the ball after timeout is called, it's supposed to be considered a delay of game penalty, so they'd be moved back 5 yards,
right,
which would have turned a 53-yarder into a 58-yarder, which is significantly more.
Right.
Because he was pretty close about making it as it was.
Right.
He did eventually
barely made it
on the second attempt.
In fact, we thought it was short initially.
I did.
Yeah.
It was not as good as his first attempt.
Right.
So, if that was called properly, then that could have, at least gotten us to go into overtime and given us a chance.
Right.
So the refs in general were just being very lackadaisical in this game. They were not calling holding or pass interference very often.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to say, let's let these guys play, but you still have to call the game rules. You just don't want to call the ticky-tack stuff. Well, they were choosing to swallow their whistle and allowing a lot of stuff to go on, but both ways. So to that extent, you always ask for referees to be consistent. But I'd like to see consistency not only within a game but game to game. There ought to be a general path on this, and I just feel like refereeing this season, particularly in the Big Ten, has been very, very uneven.
Oh yeah, it's been terrible, frankly. And then just one off-the-field thing we wanted to mention, because it has gotten some news coverage, is that the Nebraska players, wanted to meet at midfield before the game to do kind of a preseason or pregame meeting, because that's one of our traditions, I guess.
Right.
And apparently there was police there at the stadium that kept us off of the midfield area where the Hawkeye logo is. So they forced us to not go there. And then later in the game, when the captains went to shake hands after the coin flip, our captains did not shake hands with the Iowa captains, which, of course, made some Nebraska fans upset because, we like to think of ourselves as the more courteous team generally. We have a tradition.
There's sportsmanship.
Yes, we have a tradition of being good sports, unlike some of our competition like Colorado and Miami and Oklahoma in the past and things like that. So to see us being the unsportsmanlike ones, it's not great to see. On the other hand, them bringing in police to stop us at midfield seems a little excessive. But what are your thoughts on all that, Dad?
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't even notice, right? So all of that was that's just stupid gamesmanship by both teams, frankly. And I think because it's been an issue now in multiple games, with the whole Colorado thing and all this.
USC,
then just don't,
right?
USC,
kind of a little fight beforehand.
Don't go to midfield anymore. Not that big a deal. Not worth creating that situation. And then the no shaking of hands thing is crap. I'm totally against that, and I think that was the wrong decision to make for the leadership of our team. I mean, I get that they were talking all week about the chippiness and the attitude of the Iowa players. And you know what, Nebraska? You got to stop worrying about the chippiness that they have and go out there and beat their ass and then put it back in their face, just like they've been doing to us. And then that'll kind of settle that down.
Right. And then I just wanted to, this is the end of our regular season now. Thankfully, we do have a postseason to talk about because we will have a bowl game this year. But I thought this would be a good podcast just to talk a little bit about comparing last year to this year in terms of stats and kind of how we're feeling going from 5-7 to 6-6 in the second year of Matt Rule's tenure. Interestingly, looking at the total team stats from 2024 compared to 2025, in general, 2024 improved on most important metrics. For example, total points per game in 2024, it was 23.8, while last year was 17.5. Total first downs, 197 in 2023 to 261 in 2024. Let's see here. Third down percentage was 43% in 2024, whereas it was 38% last year. And certainly in terms of passing, we were 265 of 404 in 2024 versus 136 of 261. Whoa. So, much better in that regard. Total passing yards up by about 1,000 yards compared to the two seasons. So that's obviously having Dylan around helped with that. Interceptions, we had 16 last year. We had 11 this year. Sacks went down from 30 in 2023 to 27 this year. So we're seeing, general improvement on all those stats. Not like, necessarily crazy improvement, but we are seeing improvement. Looking here, rushing yards, we had a total of 1,500 rushing yards in this year compared to 2,000 last year, 2,100. So this is one where we actually did go back, probably because we were playing Dylan instead of Heinrich, right? So we had more passing focus in our game. But it is something to perhaps criticize Matt Satterfield for. We averaged 3.8 yards per attempt in 2024 compared to 4.4 the previous year. Total offensive plays also up in that area. Yards per game up from 312 last year to 358 this year. And then in terms of penalties, we had 75 in 2024 for 600 yards, whereas 2023 we had 60 for 500. So there's another example where we did actually get a little worse. Time of possession, a little bit better, 32 minutes to 31 minutes. And then the big one was turnover ratio. We were minus 17 last year, obviously one of the big weaknesses of our team, one of the areas that Matt said we had to fix this year. And we ended this year +1. So, you look at that list of stats overall, that was one of the things we highlighted in our pre-season podcast was how we needed to change the turnover margin, make that go in our favor. And we did, even though we still had more turnovers than we would like this year and in some critically bad moments. Yep. But definite improvement over the disaster of last year. We did have more offensive, points per game than last year. Probably a good bit of that was helped by that Wisconsin game where we scored 44 points, because there's some other games this year where we were very low scoring. So in general, it's like all showing, incremental improvement, steps in the right direction. And we played a harder schedule this year than we did last year, now that we're in this new Big Ten and everything. So in all those areas, we won one more game. It feels like we are making steps forward with Matt Rule, but is it too slow? I think that's the key question.
Well, okay, so you went through an awful lot there. I think generally a quick review of the stats to me says we are very much the same team, right? We're not really a lot better. We just happen to win one more game, but we could very easily be 8-4, right? Instead of 6-6. I mean, there's like 4 games that you could choose from and pick any 2 of them and say if 2 or 3 plays are different, we win.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, the only that's not a big deal. 8-4 versus 6-6. In both cases, you're basically in the middle of the Big Ten in this new 18-team conference. So I'm looking for the more fundamental changes that might be happening that would lead to a potential 10-2, 11-1 season down the road in the future, right? That's what we're hoping for with Matt Rule, is that he's going to get us to turn the corner, as we say, and get us playing at a really high level where we can actually compete for maybe a conference championship.
Right. Well, and because my, turnovers was my big thing at the beginning of this year, and we did turn that around to a good extent. So my new mantra going into next year is going to be to break the one-score game curse, because we have proven, especially with this Iowa game just recently, that we still have not overcome that. When you look at our season, we lost to Illinois
in
31, right, in overtime, 31-24. We lost to Ohio State 21-17, UCLA 27-20, USC 28-20, Iowa 13-10, right? So all those one-score games. The only game where we truly got dominated was against Indiana. And I'll grant you, okay, Ohio State, even if we did, maybe score another touchdown there, they very well could have still beaten us. Okay, so there's two of our losses, but we very easily could have gone 10-2 otherwise, right?
Right.
We should have beaten.
Right.
We could have beaten all those other teams.
And that's my point, is that we were that close, right? We took one of the best teams in the country, Ohio State, and we competed with them, head to head, wire to wire, right? And we took Colorado and beat them behind the woodshed, and they are one of the best teams in the Big 12. And so, we're not that far away this season. My concern is that, as I look to next year, is how is Coach Rule going to replace the talent we're going to lose on defense? I think we have a chance to be comparable and likely better next year on offense, depending on how we're able to replace wide receivers and that sort of thing, but and some of our offensive line experience. But I feel like we're making some good strides there in depth and such. So with some strategic portal acquisitions and continued efforts in the recruiting game, I think we're going to be just fine on offense. Defensively is where there's some huge, and I mean huge, things to be filled in the first two levels of the defense. The defensive line particularly, the interior defensive line even more specifically, and then linebacker.
Right. Well, and the tricky thing is that I totally agree that you're right, that, we very easily could have been 10-2 this season, or 9-3, 8-4, however you want to, strike that balance. But the problem is that that's been true under the Scott Frost years and the Mike Riley years, right? This whole one-score losses, being that close to having a very positive season has been with us for a decade now. Right. And we keep finding ways to make mistakes, to lose those close games.
Well, and it's how teams now know that about us.
Yes.
It is a personality of our program. And so those teams now play us with that in mind. I mean, Iowa anticipated and needed for us to fall apart, and they simply literally waited for it to happen. They were completely inept on offense. They couldn't do a thing against us for 3 quarters.
Yep.
Right? And but they never panicked. They weren't concerned because they knew we were making enough mistakes to not be able to extend. Imagine if 2 of the 3 plays on the passing game that were obvious positive, huge positive plays that we can talk about. Two wide open receivers who were missed by Dylan early in the game,
or Nair's
and then Nair's drop pass. If any 2 of those 3 things were actually simply executed at a fundamental, basic football level, okay? Because Dylan wasn't necessarily under pressure, under duress. He wasn't, someone wasn't on his shoulder or whatever, disrupting his arm motion. And yet he missed those throws. And then Naor, who hadn't hardly caught a pass all day, you'd think that he'd really be ready to focus when he finally got his name called, and he lets a ball, literally perfectly thrown, go right through his hands. If 2 of those 3 things happen, then Iowa's in a very different situation. They can't sit there and wait for us to make mistakes, because now we've created enough distance between us and them that they have to actually start trying to do something. And then they would make mistakes. And so
Right.
that's how Iowa does it, and they're the best at it.
Right.
There's a bunch of teams that do that. Illinois does that. Okay? I mean, there's a lot of teams that do that when they play Nebraska.
Minnesota.
Rutgers, Minnesota, Wisconsin, they all know to stop us. Now, why did we beat Wisconsin? Because we actually scored points. We created enough distance between us and them that they couldn't play that wait-and-see game for Nebraska to collapse.
Right. Yep, and obviously you do have to give some credit to Iowa's defense, which is always very good. Even though this year it wasn't as good as it was last year,
Right.
they still were able to slow us down in certain situations. Get pressure on Dylan in certain situations to make him make throws quick. To miss guys that were open and things like that. The other tricky thing about next year, like you mentioned in terms of the people we're losing, is our schedule. We do swap Colorado for Cincinnati in our non-conference schedule, which you would say is a bit easier, but Cincinnati still isn't a team you can look over. And we do still have some tough teams in our schedule, like USC, UCLA, Penn State, and then we've got Michigan as well next year. So we don't have Ohio State, but we've got Michigan and Penn State. Penn State, who's going to go play for the Big Ten Championship this year, and Michigan, who just beat Ohio State, as we'll talk about later, and maybe finding themselves under this new Sharon Moore coach. So our schedule isn't any easier next year. No. If anything, it's probably a little harder.
Yes, exactly. This was the year to make hay, for sure, and we didn't. But we're also getting better, and so it's now... The burden is heavier on Coach Rule and his staff now because he's going to have to make some changes. We really again haven't devoted enough time to challenge the special team side. I just think changes have to be made there, both in staff and in terms of choices. Who we have snapping the football, who we have catching punts. I saw a remark, and I don't even remember what website it was on. And I think this is just so incredibly appropriate. Nick Saban, the former head coach at Alabama, apparently has a 200 question test that every single player has to go through regarding special teams, and they have to get it right. Otherwise, they don't get to play special teams. Where it seems like we're trying to get players playing time by putting them on special teams. We're trying to, give touches to young developing players on special teams. You can't look at it that way. There has to be as much intense competition for playoff or for practice.
Playing time.
Playing time to get on the field. It has to be the same as the scrutiny you're evaluating your left guard for, where you're watching every single snap of every single practice and who's our best left guard. That has to be the exact same thing, and we have to give ourselves more options. We got to devote more time to it and get more people chances so we can find people who are actually going to get the job done. And then if they don't, we have a nice group of second, third, fourth, fifth team. It's like we don't have anybody else.
Right.
Because we kind of just pick and grab.
Well, and once again, I would say, special teams was a very big problem last year.
Yeah.
And we did show general improvement in it this year. Right. It was up and down for sure. It was inconsistent. But overall, I would say it was improvement in terms of our punting, in terms of the field goal kicking, right? Like we mentioned, in this game, John Hull made one and missed one. But the one that he missed was more on the snapper than on him. Though, once again, that goes to the special teams unit as a whole needing to be cohesive and whether we should keep that coach around.
Right.
Quick last question for you. Gut feeling right now, we still need to play our bowl game. It sounds like we might be playing in the Pinstripe Bowl in New York this year. But say that Matt Rule is 7-5 in the regular season next year. So he kind of continues this trend of incrementally getting better. So we win one more game than we did next year. But we still have some frustrating losses in overtime or one-score losses. So we're kind of seeing, similar to this year, basically, incremental improvement, but not a major step forward. How do you think Husker Nation will be feeling in year 3 of Matt Rule in that scenario?
There will be more people who will be unhappy and be voicing their displeasure. And there'll be the certain stupid boo birds that will be clamoring for his, for change, right? But if that were to happen, I think you have to stay with Matt as your head coach. You might be able to call for, again, maybe some additional changes in staff to really focus in on specific areas of the team that are not improving sufficiently. And then you just got to keep doubling down on your recruiting, right? And your evaluation of talent through the NIL portal. I mean, that's just the reality. That's how we go from where we are to, something way better. Now, everybody's going to argue the Indiana argument, right?
Right.
And every coach in the country who is struggling to build his program is going to get the Indiana argument. I think the Indiana argument is the exception, not the rule. The circumstance he had was a unique combination of things that happened. We'll see how that experiment plays out 3 or 4 years down the line.
Right. After all these transfer people he brings in leave the program or graduate, and he has to start building his program properly, or does he go the full Deion Sanders route where he's just going full freelance,
right?
Which isn't sustainable in the long term.
Well, it'll be hit and miss. There'll be years when maybe you make really good decisions like he did this year with his portal selections, and other years he's going to make what he thinks are just as good of decisions, but they're not going to pan out as good.
Right.
And that's the way it is.
All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Nebraska Volleyball. As we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we did have a loss yesterday and Friday, right before the Nebraska game. So Dad was in a particularly sour mood as the Iowa game got started, which of course was against Penn State. We mentioned that on the previous podcast. We ended up losing that one in 4 sets, so giving us our second loss of the year and putting us in a situation where we needed to, today, beat Maryland to then retain a share of the Big Ten championship with Penn State. And we did manage to do that. We dropped the first set against Maryland, but then we dominated the next 3. So we are shared Big Ten champions. We will likely be ranked number 2 overall going into the tournament and still get to have some of our games be at home as the tournament gets started. So still overall in a good position, but not the sharp end of the season we were hoping for after we beat Wisconsin 3-0 the previous week.
That's right. That's a good summary. The real key here is now tomorrow, Sunday, is Selection Sunday for the 64-team field of the NCAA volleyball tournament. And they now very specifically seed the top 32 of those teams. After 32, they try to do as best they can with positioning, but there's also some consideration for travel and balancing regions, right? But those top 32, they pretty much go into slots based on what their data analysis defines. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how this now plays out. I think had we beaten Penn State, not only would we have been, exclusive Big Ten champions and not a co-championship, but we would have pretty much guaranteed ourselves that we would have been the number 1 seed, I believe, going into the tournament. Pitt, for example, today went 5 sets against Georgia Tech, a team that's kind of borderline top 20, and required, it was 15-15 in the 5th set. I think they won 17-15 in the 5th set. So I still think they'll end up being number 1 because they ultimately did win that game, right? They win that match. So so they're going to probably end up with the number 1 seed. It's going to be us or Penn State number 2. I think there's arguments both ways, but if you look at the depth of our schedule and the strength of our schedule, I still think it's better than Penn State's, and we'll probably get the nod. So we'll be number 2. So then it becomes a question of who is number 7, right? Right now that's Wisconsin. So we would be looking at having to play Wisconsin a third time unless they move some things around, because Wisconsin struggled too in their last 2 games. They almost got beat by Ohio State, unranked Ohio State, at home. So I think...
interesting. The same Ohio State team we saw play against Minnesota, give them a little bit of trouble, but ultimately get beaten by Minnesota.
Correct. Exactly. So it's going to be interesting to see how the selection committee manages through all that. And so it really doesn't matter that you're number one or number two. What matters is you're one of the top four. That gives you a home matches the first 2 weekends of the tournament, basically all the way until the Elite Eight. You win the Elite Eight, you're into the Final Four, and you've played all those games at home. And Nebraska has secured that.
Right. That's right. All righty. So now we're going to talk about the National World of College Football. We were watching some games both yesterday and today. We've been spending some time at the racetrack with your brother AJ, who's been on the podcast in the past. So it's been a fun weekend. But of course, one of the big games this weekend was the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry game. On the last podcast, we gave predictions for that one. I predicted that Ohio State would win 28-20, and you predicted Ohio State would win 38-31. But you were amazed at the 20-point spread for Ohio State in that game and actually made a bet on that spread. And
legally, of course.
Of course. And it turns out that you were right because it went Michigan's way. It went further than just them beating the spread amount. They actually ended up winning the game outright, which was quite a shock. That one ended up being 13-10. Michigan, Ohio State, same score as our Iowa game. Frankly, an ugly game in a lot of ways.
Very, very similar to our game, actually. There was a point in the midway in the third quarter where Ohio State statistically, in some regards, was as dominant as we were in the comparative to Iowa. They were compared to Michigan. Now, what happened the remainder of the game, Michigan came back and ended up having way more rushing yards than Ohio State and kind of dominated from that point forward. But the bottom line is that it was a classic example, just like our game, of Ohio State not taking advantage of opportunities.
Yep. Both teams had 2 turnovers, total yardage, Michigan 234, Ohio State 252. And yeah, time of possession in Michigan's favor, actually 33 minutes to 27. But yeah, frankly, an ugly game all around. Both teams turned the ball over inside, their own red zones a couple times, which kind of flipped momentum around, obviously. And Ohio State missed 2 field goals, which obviously when you lose by 3 is a pretty darn big deal, both very makeable. And there was even a situation where, I think Ohio State turned the ball over, then Michigan State turned the ball right back over to them, which gave Ohio State an easy, field goal attempt that they then missed, So yeah, it was a weird game, but this now brings Michigan up to 4 wins in a row. I believe it's the biggest upset in that rivalry since 1960 in terms of the point spread going into the game. So it gives Michigan some nice momentum, even though they've had a very disappointing year after coming off of a national championship game. They kind of found some things near the end, managed to upset Ohio State, and getting a win over Ohio State is always going to make Michigan fans happy. Meanwhile, even though Ryan Day has overall been very successful at Ohio State, he's actually 64-3 in games that don't involve Michigan, but against Michigan. Well, I should say he's 64-3 in games that don't involve Michigan or the college football playoff. So against Michigan now he's lost 4 times in a row, and he says he's 2-7 in those career-defining moments. 4-6 against top 25 teams. So basically, the accusations being thrown at him is that you're a good coach, but you can't win the big ones, and you've got a bugaboo with Michigan, which is a major problem for any Buckeye fan.
That's true. And so that is real pressure. That is real hot seat stuff. And because they will absolutely fire him for not beating Michigan, even if all the other stuff is pretty good. Now, I don't think that's going to happen this year. That's not happening now. But it is definitely something to keep an eye on, because they have done that before, where they've taken a guy who was very successful overall, but at lots of 9-win seasons back when there was 11 games per season, and they fired him anyway because he couldn't beat Michigan.
Right. Though, would they look at the history of that? I'm blanking on his name right now. The old coach at Michigan when I was young in the early 2000s, who they fired because he kept losing to Ohio State, even though he was getting good records.
Right. It wasn't Lloyd Carr?
Yeah, Lloyd Carr. That's it. They fired him, right? And then they kind of like Nebraska, right? They went through the wilderness, going through coach after coach until they finally found Jim Harbaugh and managed to turn the ship around. But, they were in the coaching carousel for quite a while there, and Ohio State wants to avoid that. Right. Now, obviously, you do have Urban Meyer still out there, your former coach, but he's shown no interest in coming back to coaching anytime soon. And, a lot of the big-time coaches, right, got kind of, taken up last year. Last year was a year of a lot of big coaching shakeups with Saban retiring and things like that. So, yeah, I think, they'll stick with Ryan Day. He's now in I believe his either fifth or sixth year. This is fifth or sixth year as the Ohio State coach. So he's, had his own time, certainly, to build together his program, prove that he can recruit very well. But you got to be able to beat the Wolverines.
That's right. Well, yeah, so John Cooper was the one I was thinking of from Ohio State. Ohio State, he had 111 wins and 43 losses and 4 ties. He was the coach for basically 12 years, but he had a disappointing record against his rival Michigan and in bowl games. So, I mean, bottom line is they have a history.
Well, and I will say, when I was looking online, of course, a lot of people are complaining about Ryan Day today, and I saw someone mentioning that when they played against Alabama in the previous college football playoff, that apparently at halftime he didn't talk to his team, but he went to his office and yelled at his coaches, upset at how the game was going. I don't know if that's true or not, but it definitely does not strike the image of the kind of coach you're looking for if you're trying to win national championship games.
Well, that's interesting. I've never heard that.
Yeah. The other game we predicted on the previous podcast was a big one for the SEC, Texas A&M. The winner of that game goes to play against Georgia in the SEC championship game. I predicted that Texas would win 38-28, while you predicted they would win 35-21. Ended up being a little closer and a little lower scoring than either of us anticipated, with Texas winning 17-7 over A&M. Interestingly, A&M's 7 there was off of a pick 6. So their offense was pretty much inept the whole game. But Texas also, they scored those 17 points, I believe, all in the first half, and then went scoreless in the second half. Both teams kind of turning the ball over, punting a lot. So not necessarily a confidence booster for Texas. On the other hand, Georgia, as we'll soon talk about, had their own scare and their own game. So the SEC is just kind of in a weird place this year.
It's true. You look across the whole landscape of college football, and there's not one of those teams like maybe Georgia or Alabama have been in the past where you would look at them and say they're clearly one of the top two teams in the country. And so just everybody has flaws. Nobody has the complete team.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And speaking of which, we do have Georgia versus Georgia Tech, of course, the classic rivalry game that was not an SEC game, so it didn't matter for their conference record. And Georgia ended up winning that one 44-42 in the 8th overtime. Crazy game. We caught the end of that one live as they kept trading back and forth with these overtime 2-point conversions. But interestingly, both teams missed a field goal in that game. Georgia Tech a 25-yarder, Georgia a 53-yarder. Georgia Tech was actually up 17-0 by halftime. Georgia Tech then later had a pass interference on a 4th and goal that gave Georgia a second chance at scoring a touchdown, which of course they did. So that was a huge mistake by them. But despite it all, they came back. They scored again. They were up 27-13 with 5 minutes left to go in the game. So Georgia scored, and then Georgia Tech had a critical fumble that then gave Georgia great field position to score again, to tie the game, to bring it into that overtime. So the fumble there was a real turning point.
And that's name the game, and that's when you go through this rundown like that, Alex. That's what you're going to get, right? It's going to end up being just a few plays swing, a result one way or the other, and it's just a matter of who's making the most plays.
And I know the Georgia Tech coach has gotten some criticism for the fact that in the first overtime, when you can choose whether you kick the extra point or you go for two, he chose to kick the extra point and just keep overtime going rather than going for two there and betting it all on winning or losing because it was at Georgia.
Right, and he was going second.
Right, they were the second team to score there. So we had the option to, do the Tom Osborne, right, and try to be aggressive and end the game there versus going back and forth with these overtimes. Now, I'm sure you could analyze each individual overtime session and look at, the mistakes they made there or how they could have ran the ball more to maybe score on one of the times they didn't and win. So it was just a crazy game overall.
Yes, it was. And it's just this end-of-year thing. You start looking at all of these things, the Ohio State-Michigan game, this Georgia game. There just were so many games that did not turn out the way we thought they were going to.
Yeah. Well, speaking of one, in the ACC, once again, a non-conference game, rivalry game, you had Clemson versus South Carolina, and that one went South Carolina's way 17-14. We didn't get a chance to watch that one since we were at the racetrack today. But that one went against Clemson, but because of what ended up happening with Syracuse-Miami, as it turns out, Clemson's still going to be able to go to that
Conference.
ACC championship game against SMU, but it does have implications for their potential placement in the playoff now that they have another loss. Speaking of which, that Miami-Syracuse game, we did watch the highlights of that one. That one went Syracuse's way 42-38. After you poo-pooed Syracuse on the previous podcast, Dad.
Yeah.
Miami actually went up 21-0 by the end of the first quarter, early second quarter. It was looking like they were going to be dominant. But Syracuse figured out what they could do to exploit Miami on their passing game. They found some matchups that they liked, and they started really putting it together, tied up the game. And then later there was a scoop and score by Syracuse in the third quarter that gave them a lead. And late in the game, Miami was down, I guess it would have been 42-35, got deep into onto the opponent's side of the field, rather. And I think it was 4th and 7, somewhere in that range at the goal line. And they chose to kick the field goal rather than going for it for the touchdown, which I think that would make some sense with the time you still had left on the clock if you were confident in your defense. But this Syracuse team had been throwing it all over your defense the whole 3 quarters of the game. And as it turns out, Syracuse got some first downs and won the game on time there. So I'm not sure if that was the right call.
Well, that is a little bit hindsight 2020, right? So I would say, the coach is just trying to have a feel for the game, and it's really hard when your defense is giving up lots of points. What is the best strategy, right? Because if you give somebody a short field, then you're almost guaranteeing that they're going to score points on you. But punting the ball, you're just giving them further to go, but they're still likely to score, right? So which one is better?
Right. Yeah, so as we mentioned, that one sets up the ACC championship game. SEC is going to be Texas versus Georgia. Then in the Big Ten, because Ohio State suddenly lost, that opened up the door for Penn State, who beat Maryland solidly today. So even though Indiana also played today and crushed Purdue, Penn State has the better overall matchup spread, or score spread, I should say, against the common opponent shared between both Penn State and Indiana. So that gives Penn State the win in the tie. And so it's going to be Penn State versus Oregon, who also won today over Washington in the Big Ten. And then in the Big 12, that was one of the ones that was very up in the air going into this weekend. And Iowa State won a good game against Kansas State 29-21, including a safety that they got in the fourth quarter that really gave them a good opportunity to go up in that game. And also Arizona State crushed Arizona in their rivalry game 49-7. So that sets up the Big 12 to now be Arizona State versus Iowa State because of the tiebreakers.
Well, but according to the article I just was reading, there actually is still a game going on that is going to have an impact. We are talking, here on Saturday evening, and it's almost 10 o'clock, but the BYU Houston game is still going on. It's late in the third quarter. BYU is winning 21-10, and but the BYU has to win that game for Iowa State to be the choice. So we'll wait and see what happens.
So you're saying
to finalize that.
If BYU loses that game, so BYU's not in, Iowa State's also not in, so Colorado gets in?
Well, so according to this, Iowa State needs to win and have BYU win. So they won. BYU is winning. So that looks like Iowa State's going to be the one. And BYU is out because Iowa State won. Colorado needs a BYU loss. So
okay.
Colorado could still get into the playoff if BYU lost.
Right, but they're currently up 21-10 in the third quarter against Houston.
Correct.
Okay,
so we're still a little twisty there, but and I obviously want BYU to win so that Iowa State gets the chance. I'd love to see Campbell get into that Big 12 championship game, and I do not want to see Dion there.
That's definitely true, even though it would look better for Nebraska's schedule since we beat Colorado. But
I don't care about that.
But we don't care about that.
No.
Okay, well,
irrelevant.
that's good to note. So we will, since we are still recording this on Saturday night, we will move forward with the assumption that BYU wins.
Yes.
That's ISU, ASU for the championship game when we give our predictions later. And then in terms of the other games going on this past week, Alabama beat Auburn 28-14. And then Notre Dame played against USC in their traditional game. The final score of that one ended up being 49 Notre Dame, 35 to USC. But frankly, the game was closer than that score would make you think. They were tied for quite a bit of the game. They kept going back and forth. It looked like Notre Dame did have a 7-point lead, but USC was driving. And then USC threw a pick that then got returned down the left side of the field for a touchdown. And then USC gets the ball again, has another nice drive down the field, throws a pick again, and it's returned for a 100-yard drive down the left side of the field again.
So 2 pick sixes, both of them 95-plus yards.
In like the last 5 minutes of the game,
right.
Which I don't know if I've ever seen that before.
That's true. I don't know that I have either.
So, if Notre Dame did lose that would have kicked them out of the playoff. But since they won, they are not playing in a conference championship game, so they're pretty much guaranteed that they're making it into the playoff, not in the top 4, but in one of those other slots, which I'm happy about because it increases the likelihood that we maybe only get 3 SEC teams rather than 4 by having Notre Dame be in there. Well, obviously, on next week's podcast, we'll know the results of the conference championship games. We'll know how the playoff, rankings are announced and everything, so we'll be able to really dive into, how everything's going to shake out there. And, where we agree with the committee and where we may disagree, which we'll definitely get into, because now people are talking about how, because of some of the losses that happened today, there's a path where Alabama might sneak in at a 12th or 11th seed or something like that.
Yep.
So we'll have to see how all that goes. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and give our predictions here for these conference championship games. Let's start off with Penn State versus Oregon. That's being played in Indianapolis, of course. And like I said, Penn State beat Maryland. Oregon beat Washington. We were expecting the rematch of Oregon versus Ohio State from earlier this year, which Oregon won only by 1 point, a very narrow game. So both teams have kind of struggled, right? Oregon nearly lost to Wisconsin, who then Nebraska beat the week later. But Penn State's also had some scares. Like I think they had one against Minnesota that same week as well. So they're both teams that have kind of struggled at different points in the year. But overall, I think I have to give the game to Oregon. I think they have better athleticism overall. They beat Ohio State while Penn State did not, even though Penn State lost to them narrowly. So I think I'm going to give that one to Oregon. But I do think Penn State will score some points, and it'll be an exciting game. So let's say Oregon wins 35-28.
35-28. Well, so I agree with a lot of what you said there, but here's the thing. I was really expecting, and I predicted before the season began on the podcast, that Ohio State and Oregon would play each other in the regular season, and Oregon would win that game, and then Ohio State and Oregon would play a second time in the conference championship game, and Ohio State would win the rematch. That's obviously not going to play out that way because of Ohio State's loss, and I really think Ohio State was, from a talent standpoint, the best team other than Oregon, right? Those two were the top two teams. Now with Penn State, I would agree. I think Oregon's going to win. The issue is it's in Indianapolis, which is a lot closer to Pennsylvania than it is to Oregon.
That's true.
And so I think that there's going to be a huge advantage for Oregon. I mean, for Penn State in terms of crowd and just general comfort level of being there, And Oregon has struggled, like almost all the West Coast teams have, when they've had to travel cross country to come and play.
Be cold.
And it's going to be cold, but it's an indoor stadium.
Okay.
So, but just all the stuff that surrounds that game, all the exterior stuff, you'll still be outside, right? Like all the fans and all that. But I just have this feeling Oregon's going to struggle a little bit with that coming across the country thing and all the hype of it. So I'm going to predict a Penn State victory in a close battle. Penn State's finally going to get over the hump, right? What's his name?
James Franklin?
James Franklin is finally going to have his moment. So that's what I'm going to predict, even though I believe Oregon's the better team. But just based on what we've seen this year with those teams having to travel all those time zones, although this is in Indiana, which I think is basically central time zone, so it's really only 2 hours rather than 3. But it's still a long ways. It's a long flight. So I think I'm going to go with the upset, just to be the contrarian. So what's the score going to be? I'm going to say the score. There's going to be a feeling it out period in the first quarter or so, and then. But a lot of times these end up being blowouts. But I'm going to say this one's going to end up being tight. So let's go 28-24, Penn State.
Okay, interesting. I do like your pitch of the advantage of the stadium being in Penn State's favor. I think that is a good point. All right, so next we'll do ACC, Clemson versus SMU. As we mentioned, Clemson lost to South Carolina today. Meanwhile, SMU won. They were playing a lesser team, and they crushed them pretty good. So SMU has gotten the advantage of having a pretty easy schedule, right? They didn't play Clemson. They didn't play Miami in the regular season. So on the one hand, you would say that, this is the time where they get exposed. On the other hand, right, Clemson had a rough start to their year, and even though they've since recovered, now they kind of stumbled here at the end. On the other hand, it is being played in Charlotte, North Carolina, so you'd have to give the home field advantage there to Clemson in terms of the fans coming to cheer on their team and all that. So there's a lot of different variables in this one.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to maybe be a little boring and say that Clemson wins and that they snuff out SMU's Cinderella run here. But might be... No, I was about to say maybe lower scoring game, but I think if it's lower scoring, SMU probably wins. So I'm going to have to say that Clemson gets some points and wins that one. Let's say 30-20.
30-20. Okay. I'm gonna be a contrarian again. I'm gonna go with SMU, even though I believe that they have had the benefit of an easier schedule, but this loss in South Carolina by Clemson scares me, right? And SMU is riding high and is confident. And, so I'm going to say SMU, but it's going to be kind of a nail biter, 28-27.
Okay. 28-27.
And, I'm not going to change my Oregon Penn State guess. However, I am going to qualify that, as I thought a little bit more about that matchup, I don't think that Penn State's going to have an advantage in the crowd. And not because they don't have more fans that are conveniently available, but because they didn't expect to be there.
Well, and you pointed
out Oregon has known for a week.
You pointed out how even in the game today, a good portion of their stadium was empty.
Yeah,
as a home team.
Yeah. So I probably should change my pick, but I won't change the pick. But I was wrong. Oregon's going to have more fans than Penn State.
Okay. And to clarify, SMU beat Cal today 38-6, but it was a 6-6 Cal. So Take of that what you will. All right, and then we got Texas versus Georgia in the SEC. As we mentioned, it is kind of a weird matchup because Texas has generally been at the top of the leaderboards this whole year. Been right there in that top four. And they did beat their rival Texas A&M, but it was not in pretty fashion, as we mentioned. On the other hand, Georgia, against their own rival, Georgia Tech, was losing for the majority of the game and had to go into a crazy 8 overtimes in order to win that one. Kind of like how they had a crazy game against Alabama, but that time it didn't go their way. It went Alabama's way. It is, of course, being played in Atlanta. So you got to give the advantage to Georgia on that one. It's basically in their own backyard. So, you know what? I think even though Georgia has looked, susceptible this year and their quarterback isn't great, their offense isn't great, their defense is still elite, and the fact that it is in Atlanta, I think gives them an advantage. So I think I'm going to go with Georgia in this one and say they make it far into the playoffs once again, even though that's a little bit boring for those of us who've been watching the college football for the past 5 years. So I'm going to say it's a lower scoring game, and Georgia wins it 24-17 over Texas.
Okay. I'm going to agree with just about everything you said. My personal bias against Texas will not allow me to choose them. So I'm going to hope for, with all my might, that Georgia wins this game. I am a Georgia fan at this point, and I am going to predict a Georgia victory also. Because you're right, Georgia's defense is salty. It's pretty darn good. They struggled a little bit with that unique Georgia Tech offense, but Georgia's been Jekyll and Hyde offensively, though, and so I'm hoping the right team shows up this next weekend, and they certainly should have the crowd at their advantage. So I say Georgia's going to win, but it's going to be close. So I'm going to say 28-27 again.
He's a consistent man. All right, 1-point game. Wow. And then in terms of the Big 12, once again, we'll stick with Iowa State versus Arizona State. BYU is currently up 24-10 at the end of the third quarter, so we're feeling pretty good. They should win that, and Iowa State would then be in.
Well, BYU had a first and goal and only got 3.
I see. Giving them a window there. But this particular game for the Big 12 is... I didn't write that one down.
It's AT&T. You said it was an AT&T Stadium, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. It's being taking place in Arlington, Texas at the Jerry Dome, as per usual. So that doesn't necessarily give a big advantage to either team. They're both having to travel for that one. And it's two teams that definitely will travel because they're not expected to be in the Big 12. I'm pretty sure in the preseason predictions, Arizona State was predicted to be at the bottom of the Big 12. And now they're in the conference championship game, which is pretty crazy. We watched some of Iowa State versus Kansas State earlier today, and they have some salty runners for sure, showed some impressive stuff on the offensive side of the ball. On the other hand, Arizona State getting a definitive win over Arizona, 49-7. That certainly is showing strong momentum for their program. But this is the one I'm least confident in. I think it could really go either way. So I think I'll say maybe this one will be my 1 or 2 point game. But I'll give it to Arizona State and say that they win in a little bit higher scoring game, 35-32 over Iowa State.
Okay. I'm going to agree with you that the win is going to be Arizona State, but I think Arizona State's going to win comfortably. I think it's going to be like 35-17. I think Arizona State is clearly the better team right now, particularly playing really well here late in the year.
Yep. And we will just mention real quick for some of the other conferences, my alma mater, Ohio University, is playing against Miami of Ohio in Detroit in the MAC championship game. So that's kind of exciting. And then in the Mountain West, Boise State's playing against UNLV in the Mountain West championship game. And if Boise State wins that, they're very solidly positioned to be in that college football playoff. And it's in Boise. So it's basically a home game for them, too. So I feel pretty good they should win that one. And then real quick, just in terms of the playoff, as we mentioned, next week we'll know obviously what the final rankings are and be able to break that down. But looking at the rankings from the previous week, Ohio State is going to fall down. Obviously, Penn State, who was number 4, is going to move up to 3. Miami, who was 6, is going to fall. Georgia was 7th. So they may move up a little bit just because the people above them lost. But on the other hand, they looked terrible doing it. So I wonder how that affects, the committee's decision. SMU will move up. Tennessee will move up. Indiana, right? All these teams that were in that area. Clemson, interestingly, they're number 12. They'll probably move down. But then if they win the ACC championship, obviously they're still in.
Right.
And you've got Alabama at 13. They'll move up since they won. So yeah, a lot of it really does come down to, like we talked about in the previous podcast, how do they treat these teams that lose in the conference championship games versus like the third best, right? Because now you've got like Ohio State, who's going to be like the third best in the Big Ten, and they're almost certainly going to make it in. You think, okay, they're going to make it in. Most likely Penn State and Oregon will too, and then I think Indiana should probably as well, because they're clearly the top 4 teams in the Big Ten. Indiana will still have only lost to Ohio State, who will still be ranked very highly. But then you get interesting scenarios like with the ACC, right? If
Clemson.
Well, if Clemson wins, then does SMU still make it in with 2 losses with their weak schedule? Or I think if Clemson loses, then they'd have 4 losses, right? And it'd be hard to put them in at that point.
No.
Because they had 2 and now they have 3. So yeah, that's an interesting scenario. Do you have any preliminary thoughts before we get into the conference championship games?
I agree with you that there's going to be some teams that lose in their conference championship games that will not be included in the 12-team playoff. And Clemson would be a great example. If Clemson loses that game, they're out. Right. And so I think that's a winner goes and loser doesn't. Right. That's clear in the ACC thing. I also feel that way about the Big 12. Right. The Big 12, that winner is going to get in, and the loser is definitely not. Right. So there's 2. And so then it really does come down to you got Notre Dame is in, and Boise will be in for sure if they win.
Right.
So and they're going to be a pretty strong favorite. So there's 4 teams right there. The other 8 are all going to be Big Ten or SEC teams with a small possibility of a second ACC team. But Miami's loss today hurts the ACC's chances, I think, at getting two teams in? Who's going to be the other ACC team?
Right. Well, I guess it would either be a 2-loss Miami or a 2-loss SMU, right? Presuming Clemson wins and gets in automatically.
Right. Okay.
Those are their best routes, right?
Right.
Because in the Big 12, right, the third best team would be like a Colorado, right? But they still have 3 losses, so they're not making it in.
Exactly. And so those two those two ACC scenarios you just talked about are going to be compared against an SEC team.
Right, like an Alabama.
A Tennessee, an Alabama. Yeah, whoever those borderline.
Because Tennessee beat Vanderbilt today, even though it was actually Vanderbilt was winning early, but Tennessee came back and won that pretty solidly. They only have 2 losses, so they're likely to get in. Alabama at 3 losses, that's going to be the real debate, and that'll get people riled up because, of course, it's Alabama.
It's Alabama, and there's a reason for that. That angst is real.
Yes, we know that very well. So we'll have to see if the 4-team playoffs SEC bias carries over to the 12-team playoff here. And then just one final little topic we wanted to bring up. It was something you had done some research on, just looking at the overall landscape of NIL in this new world of college football and how that's affecting coaching changes at the national level and how in an ironic way it may help job security for these highly paid coaches.
Well, or at least stability, right? And it's not really NIL that's driving it. It's the legal settlement that is now going to require schools to allocate a certain percentage of their revenues to athletes. Now, that definition is very broad, and the details of it are still being worked out, but a significant amount of that money is going to go to the players, right? And so it's now, we're paying them scholarships. We're paying them at another level, which is this shared revenue sharing thing. We're already paying them the $5,000, which might get folded into that number somehow, right? Because we've been paying them $5,265 a year based on some, congressional thing, right? And so that'll all get folded in. But then the piece that's the variable piece and is continued to be the Wild West and uncontrolled is NIL. And so if you as a university are wanting to encourage and allocate dollars, then you need to have as many dollars for NIL as you possibly can, right? You can't afford to be making the decision to fire a head coach who still has 4 or 5 years left on his contract at $8 million a year in an environment where now you have to give a full 30% or 35% or whatever to the athletes, right? You don't have the money. You cannot afford to make this rash decision, if you will, to fire a guy that you thought was the greatest thing since sliced bread just a couple of years ago, right? So you're going to have to suck it up and accept that I got to ride this out with my coach that I chose and give him more time because I can't afford to fire him. So there's that affordability for firing that has just had a huge change in the scenario.
Right.
And I think it's going to make teams hold on to coaches.
Right. Well, we also talked about how it affects other things like, stadium renovations and bigger building projects,
right.
Athletic facilities, things like that, right. Things that they would be courting the big donors for.
Right.
Obviously, they still want to do that kind of stuff, but now they have to also allocate money to these NIL funds because they want to be competitive. I think I saw a number, you can tell me if I'm wrong, that this 5-star quarterback that Michigan got transferred over from LSU for next year, he's getting like $12 million or something
right.
like that. That's the rumor.
There was one supporter of Michigan that committed to sign the check for $10 million of it right now.
Wow.
So one guy is writing the check for $10 million.
Right. And think of what that could have done for the athletic department as a whole,
right.
In the pre-NIL era.
Right. Now that's the kind of guy that had they wanted to get rid of a coach, that's a kind of a money guy that they would have come to say, hey, we need to put together $35 million so we can get rid of this coach we no longer want because we still have 7 years left in our contract with him. and we want to fire him, or 6 years or whatever. And so can you go to that guy twice?
Right. And that kind of gets back to some conversations we've had briefly in the podcast over the course of this year about some big name coaches that were struggling, like Billy Napier at Florida and Brent Venables at Oklahoma, both of whom have now gotten some big wins close to the end of their season. So we think they're safe, on the basis of their on the field performance. But even if they did lose those games and they were still kind of in the hot seat in those regards, to your point, the astronomical buyouts of their contracts still being quite new into them and everything might scare the universities away, even if the fans are begging for it.
Where 3 years ago, before NIL was a thing and they weren't having to do revenue sharing, they would have done that in a heartbeat, because they would have gone out to their top 10 contributors and they would have been able to put that money together and make a change. And that will help Indiana University retain the services of the hot coach in the country right now, who will likely be everybody's coach of the year, Signetti at Indiana.
Yeah, and he's said publicly that he wants to, build a new dynasty, a new, whole thing at Indiana.
Right.
Now, of course, he says that publicly. Privately, who knows? If a major university came a knocking with a multi-million-dollar contract, he could probably be assuaged away from his Indiana dreams. Right. But at least publicly right now, and they gave him a contract renewal and everything.
Right.
So he's sticking with Indiana for the time being, at least.
Well, and here's the thing, and that's how people look at things differently. If you're at a Big Ten university or an SEC university, you're there. You've hit the promised land. So any of those schools, you can look at them, especially with the portal and NIL landscape. I have the money, I have the resources because of the conference that I'm in, that I can build a national championship caliber team here, no matter what the history of that school is, if it happens to be one of the ones that's in those conferences.
Right, the super conferences.
Exactly.
Yep. All righty. Well, this was a fun podcast. Glad we got to do it in person here. Obviously, we'll come back to you next week in our usual remote setup, and we'll be talking about the results of those conference championship games and the 12-team playoff rankings that are officially announced, and debating the various scenarios that could have come from that. And I believe on that same playoff announcement call, they also usually announce the bowl games, so we'll be able to talk about Nebraska's bowl game and how we're feeling about all that. So yeah, a lot to look forward to for next week's podcast.
Absolutely. And the volleyball playoff will be happening, and so that's absolutely going to be lots to talk about.
Yep. So if you all out there enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You also find us if you search for us on College Football Throwdown on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can leave us a rating or review if you enjoyed listening to this podcast. We always love hearing feedback from the fans. So thank you out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode in person. Until next time,
go Big Red. Go Big Red.